Hey everyone, before today's episode gets started, just one thing real quick. Many of you might not know this, but another hobby of mine is Dungeons & Dragons. That's actually Lohan, my Forest Dome cleric, which was lovingly crafted by my DM. Thanks, Rob. But the reason I bring this up is not because of Rob, sorry Rob, but because of something much more interesting. I'm talking about a fantastic D&D podcast set in the Magic multiverse. The voice acting is incredible, and it features some of my favorite commanders from Ravnica. So I'm gonna have my friend Niv tell you more about it.
Citizens of Ravnica, I am the Firemind Niv-Mizzet, and I have something you might enjoy. Encounter Party is a D&D adventure podcast set in the world of Ravnica. Join 6 professional voice actors as they traverse an original campaign set during the events following My Dragon's Maze. Rest assured, Encounter Party stays loyal to canon and is full of Easter eggs and special surprises for longtime fans of Magic the Gathering. Download anywhere you may find your podcasts, such as Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or head to EncounterParty.com and learn more about the show Wizards of the Coast is calling exciting and so smart. So go, enjoy the party, if your mind is up to it.
Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Core studio, and unfortunately today Eddie is joining me.
It's true. I knocked, and here we are.
Yep. My dog very upset that Eddie was here.
Yeah, but Bentley loves me.
Bentley does love you. Bentley does love you.
He's a good dog.
A lot. Very good dog. But aside from my dog being the bestest boy in the world, and that's not debatable, today we're going to be talking about a lot of things that might be debatable with the taboos of Commander.
Yeah, let's do it.
So when it comes to taboos in Magic and Commander, there are actually quite a few. Everyone's kind of been in that situation, or at least let's just say that everyone has been. You know, you're playing a game of Commander, or you get to a table and one player pulls out that deck. They pull out a deck that might not be considered kosher by other players, depending on what kind of play group you're playing in.
Yeah, or on the other end of things, they might be playing a deck that is itself fair, but they're playing in a way that just really gets on everyone else's nerves.
Yeah. So again, basically, you need to make sure that you're not upsetting absolutely anyone with anything that you do ever in a game of Commander. Is that right, Eddie?
That's the goal. I don't think we're going to get there, but that's the goal. No, so this episode is really kind of laying out what are the taboos of Commander, what to hopefully avoid. If you want to lean into these, that's your choice, but we're going to use these as, a description of what they are, and if you do want to play them, maybe some tips on making the people that you're playing against have a slightly better time, at least, when they do so.
Absolutely. And before we kind of jump into this further, I just want to say, and I've said this before, Commander is a social game, so just talk. Again, anyone can play whatever kind of deck they want. It's just important that you kind of communicate certain things ahead of time if you happen to be playing a strategy that maybe isn't as widely accepted by many people as one that is seen as fun.
Yeah. So everyone, I think when you think Commander, you think big battle cruiser games, just spells being slung, and a lot of these strategies say, not feeling that so much.
Not what we're doing. We are doing something completely different, and either this game is going to take 5 hours because of the way that my deck runs, or it's going to take 1 minute because of the way my deck runs.
Yeah. So these are just kind of the outliers. So when you run into these, you kind of know what to expect, and when you're playing these, you know how to keep the game moving.
Yep.
All right. So without further ado, let's get off to everyone's favorite.
Yeah.
Indisputable. Mass land destruction.
MLD. Everyone loves it.
Yeah. I actually thankfully haven't played against too many MLD decks in the wild. I definitely remember a few. The first time I saw one was an experience.
It was a very long experience.
It was. So mass land destruction. Basically synonymous with the card Armageddon, which is, I think, two white for a sorcery that says...
I think it's 3 and a white, but let's check
is
on
it?
Let's check. I mean, everyone at home can see it right now because it's on the screen.
But, you're right.
Oh, I'm right. There we
Mitch
go.
is
That's
right.
a first. All right.
3 and a white, sorcery, Armageddon. Destroy all lands.
Yep.
Nice and simple.
Very simple. So what's the problem with mass land destruction?
So mass land destruction is messing with the zone that traditionally is not messed with. People love their lands, especially me. I mean, I have a commander that is a land in Orixmethes. And so when you start messing with those aspects of the game, especially in such a big way by just destroying all of them, people don't build their decks around that sort of effect, and they can't rebuild. And so, in effect, it stops the game. Whatever's on the battlefield is still there as far as creatures, enchantments, and that sort of thing. But lands are gone. So basically, you're not casting any more spells or activating any abilities for a while.
Yeah, it's going to take quite a long time to rebuild. Maybe you don't even have any lands in your hand at that point. Maybe you had 7 lands on the battlefield. They're all gone. And now you kind of have to wait until you actually draw into lands to actually do anything.
Yeah, and Commander's a long game to begin with. So when you say, how about we hit the reset button here and add another half an hour to the game, sometimes that's fine. Sometimes it's, 11:30 at night and you're like, why?
I gotta get home. Yeah, you on here you have listed discuss the salt score in EDH Rec. Yeah, I mean out of the top 20 cards, just under 10 of them are ones that kind of blow up. I mean, all lands or a lot of lands essentially. Like there's a lot of cards up there that many players get very salty about because, people don't like when you mess with their lands. Green is supposed to be the best color. Everyone knows that. And how dare you touch green's ramp?
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of this weird thing, too, because people sometimes defend mass land destruction saying, well, I'm trying to keep the green player in check. The irony being that they're also the type of deck that's most able, in general, to recover from getting their lands blown up the quickest because they can search more up.
That's very true. And when it comes to mass land destruction, too, the thing is, if you do have a way to close out the game very quickly after you blow up all lands, that's not as kind of a salt-inducing experience as it is, again, if you are just, hey, I'm just going to blow up all lands because I'm in a bad spot right now, and then we're just going to have to all rebuild and take a long time to actually finish this game. Yeah,
so with each of these categories, we're going to try to say, okay, if you are bent on playing this particular strategy, here's a way that you can do so in a little bit more amicable way. And so for mass land destruction, as Mitch said, there's really a couple ways you can do that. Option number 1 is to basically try to break parity, so protecting your lands with something like Avacyn, Angel of Hope, which just says all your permanents are indestructible, so then you cast Armageddon, everyone else is set back to the Stone Age, and you're right where you left off, so that leaves you in a pretty dominant position.
And as a mono-white deck, you need all the help that you can get, so yeah, go ahead.
It's kind of true. It's kind of true. And then the other option is, even if you do let your lands go away, you'll see some lists that are still able to play. Maybe they have a ton of mana rocks or a ton of mana dorks, like Llanowar elves that are still sticking around so they're able to keep going. Or maybe you're playing Zurgo. Zurgo is a 7/2 that gets indestructible when he attacks. And so basically, even if everything else is destroyed, Zurgo sticks around. He's going to keep, hitting people in the face, keep the game moving.
So yeah, I mean, I think the example you have here with Zurgo is with World Slayer.
Yep.
If you attack with Zurgo and World Slayer's attached, you blow up everything except for World Slayer, and Zurgo, since it's indestructible, also sticks around too. The same works with now Toski, the brand new green commander as well. So if you want to have your little squirrel run around the giant sword and blow up everything, have fun. But yeah, ask people ahead of time, probably.
Probably. Although the cuteness factor there probably is its own mitigating factor.
You can't get salty about Toski doing that to you.
Yep.
Speaking of salty, let's move on to the next one with Infect.
So Infect, even outside of the strategy itself, is kind of a contentious topic in Commander because, as you're all aware, 10 poison counters on a person kills them. This is true in Standard, in Vintage, Modern, and in Commander. A lot of people, when they first join the format, kind of have this suspicion that, maybe since we have 40 life instead of 20 life, it should also take 20 poison counters instead of 10 poison counters to kill someone. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think that aggro strategies, and I've kind of brought this up before, and I think we've actually discussed this before, aggro strategies are pretty weak in Commander compared to a lot of other strategies, and Infect is kind of one of the only avenues that aggro really has. It's also kind of tough. Maybe, yes, the Infect player can take one player out. It's going to be tough for them to take all 3 players out, especially when the other players kind of see what's going on with an Infect player and are probably going to target them pretty quickly.
Yeah. So rather than, aggro has to traditionally deal around 120 damage, 3 players at 40 life each. So Infect takes that number down to a much more manageable 30, but it's still not that easy, especially once, boards get clogged with a bunch of creatures. So I think some of the animosity that people have towards Infect is it kind of has that feeling of getting killed out of nowhere, kind of like an infinite combo, which is another topic we'll touch on shortly.
Hey, no spoilers.
Sorry, spoilers.
Forget what he said.
So people, when they're playing the game, they kind of like to be able to assess what's happening and have a general idea of like, okay, this player's in control, this player's not, so we really need to focus on this guy. But if, whether it's via combo or infect, someone out of nowhere kind of takes the game, that can leave some players with a bit of a bad taste in the mouth.
Yeah, I mean, if you're at 120 life, let's say you have a life gain deck, which is an incredibly powerful strategy in Commander, and Mono White is very lucky to have it. If you're at 120 life and then all of a sudden, someone just hits you for 10 damage and you lose, it's not always the best feeling.
Yeah. And so I think as far as if you want to play Infect and you want to mitigate some of this animosity, it's a bit tricky because, like we said, you can talk about strategies ahead of time and let people know what you're doing. But Infect does sometimes rely on that element of surprise. So by saying, I'm going to kill you with poison, people will see it coming, and that might make it tougher to win. Yeah. And so it's a bit of catch-22 with Infect. So I think instead what I would say is as people play against it more, they will kind of naturally see like, oh, this guy's not winning 75% of the games of this Infect deck, and realize...
Finishing third a lot.
Finishing third a lot, because like Mitch said, you'll take out one player, but then you'll get the crackback by the 2 other players oftentimes. So I think this is just one that kind of we as a Commander community need to keep processing, keep understanding that, in fact, while it can be a little bit of a boogeyman, it's really not as bad as you initially think it is.
Yeah. I think you summed that up really well. Also not a boogeyman at all is combo.
Yeah, so here we go.
Definitely
combo.
Not. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so combo is what you will find most often at the highest power level of Commander and competitive EDH, and even in some more middle power decks and anywhere in between, really. But you'll really start seeing them as the primary win condition in those high power level pods. Combat steps don't really matter as much.
Yeah, you're not going to see actually very many wraths at all when it comes to dealing with creatures, because creatures on the board really don't matter.
Yeah,
unless they're part of a combo or they're Llanowar Elves or whatnot.
All right, so why do you think combo tilts people so much?
I would say that it's kind of like Infect, in that Infect does take a player out of nowhere and kind of take them out of the game. But with combo, it's almost always a combo that takes out all of their players. So you essentially just win the game completely out of nowhere, versus Infect is, sure, you surprised one player unless you played like a Triumph of the Hordes and took everyone out with a big enough army. But generally, again, it's one at a time. Yep. Combo is, hey, I got these 2 cards and now I win. That's the way it's perceived, at least.
Yeah, and I think one small thing that you mentioned there is kind of important too. A lot of the more competitive high-power combos are basically A plus B equals you win. So, for example, Thassa's Oracle Demonic Consultation is the go-to in competitive. Some more casual ones you might see are Mikaeus the Unhallowed and Triskelion. These are pairs of cards that together basically can take out your opponents no matter how much life they have, no matter what was done previously. And what you said was any 2 cards can win you the game. I think where combo sometimes is more accepted is when you keep adding pieces. Like if you're building a Rube Goldberg machine that requires every single piece of the 7-card combo and a dissertation to explain it to the table, sometimes that can actually be pretty amusing to people.
I enjoy watching those combos go off, because it's like, oh, that is crazy. I had no idea that those 5 cards interacted in that way, and now I'm going to be forever afraid of those 5 cards together.
Yeah. And so I think combo, rightfully so, does have a little bit of that reputation in our format because it's very powerful. Some people gravitate towards it, and it's becoming more and more common, especially as we keep getting more and more powerful cards. There's just more combos to be had.
Yep.
So when you're thinking about combo, what are some ways that you can kind of make it more palatable?
I mean, I do think that is definitely a discussion point ahead of time before, if you're playing with a new group, if you're playing, an LGS and that becomes a thing again, basically, having that discussion, okay, what's everyone's kind of feelings towards combo? Because, if that is kind of the main win condition of your deck, that might be problematic if, that kind of comes out of nowhere and the other players really aren't okay with, 2-card combos that just, again, went out of nowhere. I do think, again, that people need to be more understanding, of kind of those, hey, I mean, it's not really my fault that these 3-4 cards in this deck really work well together. Like, Simic Commander, Tatiova, goodness gracious.
Sure.
I mean, you've got Retreat to Coral Helm, Walking Atlas, and a Bounce Land. Those
Done.
3 cards would be in that deck regardless. Like,
True.
even if they don't combo, they all work fantastically with Tatiova. So the fact that, you have these 3 cards in your deck doesn't really completely delegitimize the fact that, they do combo, or that, that players shouldn't really be mad at you for having those 3 cards in the deck, in my opinion. Again, this differs from person to person.
Yeah, it can, and all of these can be a very personal taste sort of thing. We're not trying to convince you that mass land destruction is okay for every group. These are just, some tips on how to make it a little bit more palatable, and I think combo is the same way. There's just some people that will never really want to play combo decks or against combo decks, and that's fine. We're a pretty diverse group here in the Commander community, and I think some people are all kind of in the middle. We all have multiple decks. Like, I have my Erixmithy's deck from Close Quarters, and that deck doesn't run some of the main combo pieces with Erixmithy's. I don't have Freed from the Real or Pemmons or in the deck, and that's just a personal choice. Like, I had them in the deck a couple of years back, but once one kind of other negative strike against combo is that it's the same every time. A lot of times when we're playing Commander, we're looking for a new and unique experience, and combo removes that element in some ways. So I think this one's a little bit of a self-policed strategy, and definitely one that's going to continue to be a hot topic for a long time.
Absolutely. And like Eddie said, I think the main thing about these taboos is actually just really to be more aware of them. It's not just, you can or can't do this. It's just, please be aware kind of the implications of decisions when it comes to picking a deck or picking certain kind of aspects of a deck.
Yeah, I mean, we're all out here. The way I think of Commander is there's kind of 2 mindsets. You can play a casual deck in a competitive way if your mindset is, I want to win the game. And you can also play a competitive deck in a casual way if you're like, I want to have fun and see crazy things happen. So it's less about the deck or the play style more than the way that all the players there are approaching the game. And as long as you're playing these types of strategies, but everyone's having a good time and like just out here to have fun rather than win at all costs, and that's okay if that is you wanting to play a game more like chess, but you're playing with other human beings, and we all want to have fun at the end of the day.
Yeah, so everyone just needs to get on the same page, and that's a very hard thing to do. But again, it's a social format, so just talk.
Yeah.
All right, the next one.
Ooh, yeah.
Stacks. So Stacks, the origin actually, you had a mistake in the document, Eddie. I had to correct it. So Stacks originally came from, supposedly, is known as the $4,000 solution, or T$4KS. I'll put that on the screen probably.
Yeah.
Also the card Smokestack, which is what you put as well. So both things are correct.
Yeah, so Stacks, oh man, I don't even know. So just to clarify, these are in no particular order, but if I had to put them in an order, I would say Stacks might even beat out Mass Land Destruction for some people.
I think so too. I think it is kind of just a long drawn out kind of Mass Land Destruction in a way, but with all your things that go away.
Yeah, and so the other way that Stacks got its name is from the card Smokestack, which is an artifact for 4 mana. It says, at the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a soot counter on Smokestack. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player sacrifices a permanent for each soot counter on Smokestack. So basically, non-land or not, your permanents are going away, and this is just really synonymous with what Stacks is trying to do, which is resource denial. Like, you want to play the game, I don't want to let you. And so when we're thinking of Stacks, there's a lot of different ways that players end up building it. It can depend on the deck's color identity, what that deck's win condition and commander are, but they all carry some similar mindsets in the way that they're approaching cards. They're basically trying to build the deck so that they don't have to worry about the downsides of their Stacks cards, but they are really effective at stopping their opponents.
Yeah, so again, kind of like Mass Land Destruction, the key there is breaking parity. Like, again, like they might have all these negative effects on the board that impact everyone, but they have a way to either get around them or they've got a way that doesn't really impact them. Like, for the Professor, I built a Zur the Enchanter deck that was a very mean deck, intentionally mean. And basically, since Zur can just tutor out for you, your enchantments and whatnot, you can just bring out a bunch of enchantments that do some really negative things and that kind of impact everyone. But since you can keep tutoring things with Zur, it really doesn't matter to you, even though you're shutting basically everything else down.
Yeah. A couple other cards that, bringing back the EDH Exalt score, are Winter Orb and Stasis. We'll toss them up on the screen, but these cards are known to be the number 1 and number 2 most salty cards in the format. And they're all about stacks. So clearly it's something that people are not fans of.
No. Generally, people are not fans of, we should say.
Yes. This is another, I would say, at least as of 2021, competitive Commander. Stacks has a place. Like, it can really shut down some of the most powerful decks in the format, but it's not as good as some of the more proactive decks like the Thassa's Oracle, Demonic Consultation that we talked about earlier. So stacks can be very powerful, which is already kind of appealing to some people. And so stacks above all the others because it can induce such bad feelings in your opponents. If it's a group that you play with all the time and they kind of know it's coming, great, have fun, play however you want. But this, I would say, more than any of the other ones, can really be a turnoff for your opponents. They came there to play Magic the Gathering, and you are telling them no.
You're playing in a way. It's just a way that you can't really do much.
Yeah, so it kind of does double whammy of creating very long games as well as restricting opponents from playing this deck that they've carefully created.
Unless your opponents love watching paint dry, and they were expecting that as well.
Yes. The good news is stacks, even stacks, can be built in a more palatable way. Do you want to take the first one?
Yeah. Where's the most palatable way for stacks?
Basically, I'll step in here. The first one is to play it with people that want to. Like, honestly, just finding the group, not even in the deck construction part, but playing with competitive EDH players. They can race your stacks deck, so it's really more of a game rather than a non-game to see if you can find the right stacks piece for this situation, because they vary so much. So, like you mentioned earlier, sometimes you might be playing against a very creature-heavy deck, has a ton of the Llanowar Elves of the world, but you play Null Rod, which turns off all artifacts. But they're like, oh, that's fine. I'll keep punching you.
Yep.
So finding the right play group is important.
Yes. That's probably the biggest thing I'd say with stacks.
Yeah. Or if you are playing it more casually, really have a way to win the game quickly. A good example is the new Jorn from Kaldheim. Jorn says untap all snow permanents. So you can play a lot of things that don't allow your opponents to untap, but you get to untap pretty freely.
So you can just keep going and going and going and hopefully beat everyone pretty quickly with that.
Pretty quickly. The thing is, people like to cling on, so they might remove Jorn, and then you're in the same spot as everyone else. So
if you're in that
your mileage may vary.
Just roll over and lose.
All right, let's go on to a little bit more popular and a little bit less salty format to some.
Depends who it is. Yeah.
Depends who it is. Yep. What do we got?
Super Friends, which is a nice sounding name.
It sounds nice. Yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
I think,
Who doesn't love superheroes?
It's like the Justice League or whatnot, or the
Batman,
Avengers. Yeah, Super Friends.
Woman.
Yeah, except with just all planeswalkers and inboard wipes and yeah.
That about sums it up.
It does. Basically, when it comes to a Super Friends deck, it's just going to be a deck that has, I don't even know, 30 plus planeswalkers.
Critical mass.
A ton of planeswalkers in it. And the problem with that is that planeswalkers have a lot of decision points. You've got, usually when it comes to planeswalkers, at least 3 choices essentially with a planeswalker. I can plus, I can minus, I can zero, whatever your choices are with the planeswalker.
And they have static abilities now too.
Yeah, exactly. You've got a lot of things to remember. And then you've got, again, all those decision points, and you've got to, okay, I'm going to tick this planeswalker up and do this. I'm going to tick this planeswalker down and do this. It's going to take a very long time each turn as long as your planeswalkers stay on the board. And then again, to elongate the game further, you are incentivized to, cast a Wrath of God every other turn because you want to protect your planeswalkers. And obviously, Wrath of God doesn't deal with planeswalkers, so you're going to keep those board wipes that just deal with creatures and other permanents, but your planeswalkers are fine, so you can keep ticking up and doing your things. And it's a very elongated way to kind of win a game until you eventually get to an alt, maybe. And then that alt doesn't even win you the game, but maybe the second alt will. It's just a very long process.
You sound winded just talking about it.
I am winded just talking about it. Yes. I like your tip here. Can you just read that?
Yeah, so like I said, we're trying to provide tips for each one of these archetypes to say, here's how you can play this in a better way. My tip is don't play Super Friends.
Perfect. Let's move forward.
But really, if we want to be a little bit more constructive, like a few others that are coming down the line here, just practice with your deck ahead of time. Goldfish it, as they call it. Just play it solo, and that way all these decision points that Mitch was mentioning, you kind of have a good idea of what you'll want to do. So you don't have to spend as much time monopolizing the game.
Yep.
You can say, I do this, I do this, I do this, I pass the turn.
Yep.
Anybody that has questions, let me know.
Yeah. Questions, or if you need to stop me, or if you're going to counter something, or what, let me know, like kind of while I'm doing things, but yeah.
Yeah, the issue is that it can elongate games, so anything you can do to mitigate that will help.
And we'll kind of talk about this later too, or we actually should have talked about it before, but when it comes to like a deck that has a certain number of wraths, I found that actually to be a problem when I kind of first started playing Commander. I was building a Selenia deck, and that Selenia deck basically is a life swap deck. It's actually one of my favorite decks, but I've kind of found that people don't like it when you wrath the board every other turn, even if it's the most efficient way to build the deck and the most effective way for that deck. Again, I had 15 plus wraths in that deck, and I just did not allow things to stick around because it didn't incentivize me. So again, like a Super Friends deck, maybe tone down the number of wraths that you have in that deck, depending on the group that you're playing with. Yes, it's not the optimal way to play it, but again, you need to realize that some players might not want to play against a deck that's just going to wipe the board every other turn and they can't really get anything done.
Yeah. And so I think Super Friends, it's one that you also just don't. It's kind of self-policing in the fact that a lot of Planeswalkers are quite expensive, and so a lot of people don't play Super Friends just because building a Super Friends deck is really hard to do on a budget.
Yep.
You'll probably never see one on this channel.
Especially
Number one,
if you want doubling season.
Oh wow, yeah.
But if you do have doubling season, then you probably just win right away, so that's fine. So
so it's a little bit of a silver lining is you just don't see a whole lot of these because they cost like at least $200 to make a half decent one.
They usually do. Okay, let's move on to the next one with a deck that can be very inexpensive. Storm. So Storm is actually another deck that I had problems with when I first started building. Because,
here we go again.
Exactly, because the second that I saw Joyer Weatherlight Captain, I was in love. I was always looking for an Is It Commander that essentially provided card advantage with artifacts, and the second that was spoiled, I was like, yes, that is my new commander, because artifacts on a budget are incredibly cheap.
Yeah.
And so you can do a lot of powerful things, and I built the deck, and that's probably the deck that I spent the most time tweaking and tuning and making it perfect. And then as soon as I started playing the deck with people, I noticed that my turns were taking 10 plus minutes, and other players weren't exactly having the best time. So yeah, like I mentioned before, like we've mentioned a couple of times before, taking a ton of time on your turn and kind of monopolizing the game isn't always fun for everyone at the table. And so Storm that's what Storm decks are all about. It's all about solitaire, essentially. Like I have this really cool Rube Goldberg machine that I'm making, and now you get to all watch it happen, and I might really enjoy it, but the other players might not.
Yeah, and unlike combo, Storm decks often don't know what's going to happen themselves. They're just along for the ride like everybody else. And so you really do have to allow them to play it out as opposed to combo, which is just, here this thing happens. Storm decks need that amount of time to prove that they actually won, unless everyone else just concedes and says, it's fine, man.
Well, Eddie, as the resident Storm player, I will let you know that it is a combo. It's just a combo that involves 80 cards, and it might not work sometimes.
Perfect.
That's exactly the definition of Storm.
And so, similar to the Super Friends tip that we had, it's really a deck that if you want to play Storm, try it out on your own time. Make sure that it works quickly and effectively, and if you get this piece, then you need to do that, and just do it enough that you kind of get a cadence to it and it flows pretty naturally. Because if you're trying to figure it out on the fly, sometimes that's what you have to do, but a lot of times you can kind of find the quickest path to victory.
Yeah, like in that Joyer deck, there's a couple of things you can do where, okay, I've got this card in place, so whenever I cast a certain spell, I scry. And so then, okay, I cast a spell, I scry. Okay, do I want the top or bottom? Then I draw. There's just a lot of decision points that can happen, but the more and more you practice, the quicker you get, which is great. But again, still, that is one that I would say you probably need to discuss with the other players before you start the game, because you're kind of locking other players into, hey, watch me play this for 10 minutes, which isn't always fun for everyone else. I will say that if you kind of want to tone your Storm deck down, maybe choosing a different commander might be a way to do it. Like I switched off my Joyra to a Ruin Diver. I can't remember her name is.
Jorian.
Jorian, thank you. Jorian Ruin Diver. Yeah, you messed up Armageddon earlier, and I messed up Jorian.
We got it back, though. We figured it out.
Exactly, we got there. Quality. But yeah, so I tuned that down a little bit by saying, okay, Joyra, it might be too powerful. Jorian is definitely a kind of not as powerful version of Joyra. Nowhere near as powerful, but still I took that one apart as well because it still was a bit too stormy for some people. So yeah, definitely one that you need to find kind of the right play group to play with when it comes to Storm, or just making sure that everyone's aware that you're going to be playing a Storm deck.
Yeah, exactly. The next one we'll only touch on very briefly because it has a lot of the same problems as Storm, and that is extra turns. This type of deck you'll often see piloted by Narset is the old boogeyman for this type of one. Edric, Spymaster of Trest, and there's certainly a few others out there, but predominantly what they're trying to do is make sure that they're the only ones that get extra turns, whether it's Time Warp, Temporal Manipulation, Expropriate. They're basically trying to, rather than give anyone else a chance to respond, they're trying to win the game by chaining together extra turn spell after extra turn spell, and then hopefully digging their way into a win.
This is one that you'll never see on a budget because extra turn cards are expensive.
They are.
There's I think 2 that are kind of budget-ish you can find within $2 that you can squeeze into a deck. But
yeah, then you're paying 8 mana for the same effect that you could find at 5.
Yeah, essentially. I think Part the Water Veil is 6 mana, but it's still fine. Anyways, regardless, extra turns is kind of just like a Storm deck in a different way. You're kind of just continually, again, taking the turn continuously.
Yep, that's the plan. That is the plan.
That is the plan. So again, like Storm, talk ahead of time, and again, allow players to concede. Essentially, if they're like, "Hey, I don't want to watch you keep playing, your turn over and over again, so I'm going to concede and say, go ahead." So.
Okay. The next one's a little bit more interesting because this is one that can induce some salt, but isn't actually, in my opinion, that good or competitive. It can be, but...
Well, when you put this on the list, I was like, my initial response, actually, what I typed up was that, I don't know why people have an issue with this deck.
That's true.
Which, again, is just okay, maybe I should be more aware. We should probably announce what it is. It's Mill.
Yeah, Mill. So Mill is, when you're trying to get your opponents down to 0 cards in library, they have to draw a card they can't, and they lose the game. There's all sorts of different Mill decks out there these days. Phoenix is the one that I used to have. I have the most experience with, but there's plenty others out there these days as well.
Bruvak the Grundiloquent.
Yes.
That is the word. I can't remember if
that's absolutely the word.
That's actually
awesome.
a word. It is actually a word. I did look it up. That is a word.
So Mill occupies this weird space similar to Infect in that it's not necessarily a strategy that you'll find often in high-power decks. It's not a strategy that lends itself to that playstyle, but it still is kind of a taboo deck because it's coming at it from a psychological perspective. When you're milling someone, you're saying mill 10 cards, and then they have to, put the top 10 cards of their library into their graveyard. And as they're doing that, they're like, oh, there goes, my Nyx Bloom Ancient.
And that's my favorite card ever, and you've deprived of me of that card.
Yeah, exactly. So people are attached to their decks. So when they see a portion of their deck hit their graveyard, it makes some people a little bit bummed.
Yep.
And from a game perspective, you're not making them discard cards, and they're still drawing the same number of cards every turn until they can't.
Yes. Yes.
But it is just coming at it from this psychological thing where you're forcing them to watch their favorite cards go away, even if it doesn't have as big of an impact on the game as maybe some people think it does.
My tip is run Recursion, and then you're not going to get upset. Or just put a Shuffle Hulk in your Shuffle Titan in your deck, and then the mill player is going to be very upset when they hit that.
Yep, it is definitely something that you have to think about as a mill player. And some decks you're actively enabling.
Yeah.
There's Carador, there's Muldrotha, there's Marin, there's tons of graveyard decks out there these days. And then if you're the mill player, you might actually be helping them out.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
mill, I think, similar to Infect, it's just kind of, for better or worse, it's part of the zeitgeist of Commander, and some people love it, some people hate it, some people couldn't care less.
Yep.
So it's just one of those that if you want to play mill like I did, you just kind of have to shrug your shoulders and say, I hope this table doesn't mind.
Absolutely. Oh, and I should mention that I was joking when I was saying just put a Shuffle Titan in your deck because those things are like $40 a piece. So.
Yeah, even Vigor is not that cheap anymore.
Yeah, and those don't shuffle your entire deck.
No.
The actual Shuffle Titan just shuffle your entire deck because why not just add that on to a card that already does amazing things?
Yep.
Anyways, next up, my favorite, Chaos. That's a joke as well.
Yeah, this has to be, I think if I've ever seen Mitch upset, it's around Chaos.
I think again, this is the exact opposite of Mill. Whereas I don't see Mill as a problem. I see Mill is a deck that's at a disadvantage. You have to mill 300 cards versus taking people from 40 life down to 0.
Yep.
This is a lot harder to do, in my opinion. Whereas Chaos, again, a lot of players don't see it as a problematic deck for a pod. I do. Just because it's kind of, hey, we were all doing this one thing, but now we're just going to play a completely separate game. Essentially, is kind of the way I look at it. You've got people in certain positions where, okay, like I've been working really hard to build my board, and then someone casts Warp World or whatnot, and it's just like, okay, everyone gets completely different things now, or we, Scramble versus whatever the one is that's saying, okay, like we're going to flip a coin and see who gets this permanent, essentially.
There's a lot of variance. I mean, it is a card type that I think Wizards of the Coast knows that some people really, really enjoy.
Oh, yeah.
And some people really, really hate. It's a bit like Mass Land Destruction that way. It's, you might be a fan, you might not be a fan, but rarely is there a person kind of lukewarmer in the middle.
It's like olives, okay? Some people love olives, and those people are right.
And some people hate olives, and they're righter.
No, they're not. They're so wrong, Eddie. Let's just debate later.
So this is one that this is a card that's been played against me a lot, and I think it kind of epitomizes the Chaos strategy, and that is Warp World. It is an expensive sorcery, 5 and 3 red mana. It says each player shuffles all permanents he or she owns into their library, then reveals that many cards from the top of their library. Each player puts all artifact, creature, and land cards onto the battlefield, then does the same for enchantments, and puts anything else on the bottom of their library. And I think this card, along with many others that do similar things, kind of epitomize the fact that some Chaos cards, not all, some Chaos cards are more single target, but a lot of them change the whole board, and they basically render the game that has been being played up until that point moot. Like any decisions you made, any value you accrued, doesn't matter anymore. Let's start over.
Well, and not even just that, but especially with a card like Warp World, the amount of time it takes this card to resolve is insane. Because, I mean, first of all, everyone's got to do this, right? And everyone's got to get the cards off the top of the library. Then when you've got like enter the battlefield triggers or all these other things, you have a stack that is, I mean...
Yeah, the stack can be complicated,
absolutely.
Especially for new people.
I mean, it's gigantic. So yeah, good luck sorting through that, taking a long time, and again, playing a completely different game.
Yep.
It's kind of like
Scheherazade right to
that
play.
Thing. It's kind of like that. Basically, it's just like that. And yeah, I'm completely fine with playing against someone with a Chaos deck. Just know that I'm going to be pulling out my joke deck because some random stuff's going to happen anyways. And so I'm fine with that as long as I'm prepared. And this is, again, that's just my thing with all these. Just make sure you talk ahead of time. Don't try to surprise people with a Chaos deck, please. And now I know that if I've ever played like a Command Fest or whatnot again, it's going to be chaos.
All right, we're getting to the end of the deck types here that are epitomizing the taboo of Commander. The last one's kind of one that I added at the end because I think it's increasingly becoming more not hated, maligned maybe. And that is just generic good stuff decks. They're very popular. There's Golos, there's Tulane, there's Moltrotha, there's any number of Simic commanders that just ooze value. And it's really tempting to like build a deck that you know is going to work consistently and be strong. So there's a lot of draws to good stuff. But I think this one is becoming a bit of a taboo because people play Commander as opposed to other games because it's a 100-card singleton format that can lead to games that are, full of crazy board states and things that you might not see anywhere else. And in the realm of good stuff, these are things that you see all the time. And so there's something that kind of irks some people, myself sometimes included, like, oh, it's, and the new AEC, Tyrant of Gyre straight to the Simic one. It's just like, oh, they're going to play lands. They're going to draw cards. Okay, sounds good. But they're very expected. You're losing some of that novel gameplay that we sometimes come to Commander for.
There's nothing wrong with playing, a deck that, you No just has kind of like really, really good cards in it, and just a ton of good cards. You just chuck them all in the same deck. There's nothing wrong with that. And yeah, I don't think, again, that this might be one that you even have to kind of discuss ahead of time, but just kind of if someone rolls, their eyes at you after the third game that you cast a Cyclonic Rift or whatnot, that might happen, if you just keep playing a lot of good stuff cards. You've got your Smothering Tithe out, and then, you've got your Rhystic Study as well, and you've just got all of these cards that are just oozing value, and
I think if you want to mitigate it, the best way to play a good stuff deck is to not forget to
play
win.
budget.
Play budget.
Then you can't play just good stuff because it's too expensive.
Fair point. If you aren't playing budget, another way you can mitigate it, true, is to make sure that your deck has a win condition.
Yep.
So whether you're budget or not budget, if you're oozing all this value, at least have a win condition in mind. It can be Craterhoof, Avenger of Zendikar. It's basically a combo at this point. If that's your win condition, that's fine. But a lot of people find themselves building these good stuff decks, and they're like just hoping that by sheer overwhelming value they win somehow.
I drew 12 cards this turn. How have I not won?
Yeah, and it sometimes can lead to that kind of spinning the wheels feeling. So as long as you have a way to win, that would be my number one. And the number two is to combat it from the other end, is if you're playing against a good stuff value deck, understand that like some people just maybe they've had a few games that aren't going their way and they just want a reliable deck, and also understand that these types of decks are really good for new players. So if you got someone that's just getting into the format or kind of curious about it, good stuff decks like AEC or Tatiova, they can be great starting points because they're simple most of the time, or can be built in a simple way, but still be powerful enough to hang out with some of the other commanders in the format.
Absolutely. So what you're saying is if someone's a new player,
yeah,
you should give them a good stuff deck that's extremely expensive, and then have them play that deck. And then they're like, this is awesome. I had a great time. How do I purchase this deck? And they're like, that'll be $5,000.
Exactly.
And then their expectations are shattered.
Yeah. Welcome to Commander.
Welcome to Commander. Have you heard of the reserve list?
Oh, God, we're never going to be done.
Let's move on.
We are, however, done with taboo deck types.
But there's more taboo things that you can do.
Coming to a table near you. Taboo gameplay. There's fewer of these, so hang with us. We're only going to talk about 4 things. The first one, I would say out of all of the things on this list, this is the one that irks me the most.
Yeah.
And that's when someone comes to a game store and maybe the power level discussion isn't even had, or someone misconstrues their deck, but they bring a deck that's clearly more powerful than the rest of the board. Doing that is kind of called, in slang terms, pub stomping, is become the term for that. And basically it's when, you're just really caring about the win more than you care about the other people. Yeah,
I mean, if you, again, I think the biggest problem with this one, obviously everyone makes mistakes when it comes to evaluating your own deck's power level. But if you're actually actively lying about your deck's power level, like, oh, it's a 5, but it's really like a 9 or like an 8 or whatnot, then you're kind of setting everyone else up with an expectation of about the game going a certain way, and them selecting their own decks, expecting that to be that way, and then you just win because you've got a deck that's 3 power levels above everyone else. Now, again, mistakes can be made, obviously, where you might not be able to evaluate your deck, or people have different evaluation kind of criteria, essentially about what power levels are. And, a mistake can be made where, okay, halfway through the game you realize, oh no, my deck is way too powerful for this pod right now. Apologize, obviously those things happen, and then just, pick a different deck next time, reevaluate, change that up. But again, I think the big problem right here that at least that I have with this is, again, if people are actually actively lying about kind of their deck's power level or about what it's about.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that I would assume all the audience members of Commander Quarters would never do this, but you probably see it at your LGS. I know I've seen it a number of times, and this is the thing that bugs me the most, mostly because if someone is pub stomping a group, trying to take down the table at all costs, they might just, delete someone from the format. A new player might be like, well, that was awful, and then never come back again.
That's true. That's very true. And I haven't seen it all that much. I mean, I have run into it and seen it, but again, I think that being open and honest, and again, being social for a commander is very important, and just kind of discussing and getting on the same page ahead of time. So, and that's Pub Stomping is the exact opposite of that. So
Yeah, exactly.
it's like, hey, no, we're on the same page. Just kidding, I win. Wasn't that fun?
Yeah, wasn't that fun? So the next one is another taboo gameplay method, and that's what's sometimes called kingmaking or spite plays. These are acts during the game where maybe you know you're going to lose, you're on the way out, but as you die, you're going to get rid of Joey's, most powerful card in their deck. They were clearly in a winning position, and you're just like, because you could, you're like, I'm going to die anyway. Utter end.
Well, Joey didn't invite you to his birthday party last week, so you got to pay him back for that.
Yeah, it's best to bring outside problems into the game of Commander.
Yes.
So these are some things that I think some people, and again, each pod is different, each person is different, so if it makes sense to you, go for it. But I see some people kind of prop this strategy up as a good thing, because they're saying that if I am kind of like a rattlesnake, if you are striking out at your opponent, even when you know you're going to die, then next time when they're considering killing you in the next game, maybe they'll reconsider. And that might be true, but it's also just really bad sportsmanship.
I think it can be. Depends on how. I think it really. Yeah. This one very much depends on the group that you're playing with, and kind of how well you know the people, and kind of just how your interactions go. I think this one, calling it taboo, yes, it's kind of on the border of being taboo, I would say. I think this one really depends upon the play group and you knowing the people. Again, like if Eddie's about to take me out and I'm like, I'm gonna take out your whatever, your commander or whatnot on my way out.
Or maybe someone's on a winning streak and
they're like, I gotta knock Eddie down a peg or whatnot. Yeah. But again, I think this one is kind of more so it depends on your play group. Yeah,
I would just be wary of it in certain contexts, because if you are playing Kingmaker, if you say that this person is going to win because I took out this other person's permanent. Not only does it make that person feel bad because they were in a dominant position, but it also makes the person who ultimately wins kind of feel bad because they feel like they didn't earn the win. So just that isn't true all the time.
Say, if you're playing with me, definitely king make me.
Mitch will feel no remorse.
I win! Yes! Just kidding.
So just to be aware of that if it seems like that's the situation.
Yeah. Next up, we've got rules lawyering, and I love your top quote on this one. Go for it.
Well, actually, according to Rule 723, no. So rules lawyering is when someone who knows the rules in and out or has just been playing a really long time, and they aren't showing off their knowledge because they want the game to play accurately. They're showing off their rules knowledge because they want you to know how many rules they know.
Yep.
And like knowing a lot of rules isn't a bad thing, but it can come off as a little bit snobbish, especially to new players. Like if they make a decision that they think will result in one outcome and you're like, well, actually, because of this interaction, it doesn't. And you're a bad player because of it. Like sometimes that's the kind of feel.
There's a right way to educate someone on kind of, how these interactions happen and whatnot, and kind of being very understanding that players are going to make mistakes.
Yep.
Yeah, and it doesn't make one person better or not for knowing certain really specific rules.
Yeah, and sometimes, especially in the era of COVID, if you're playing over webcam, it's really easy to lose track of board states, and Commander gets complicated. So, it depends on the play group, but sometimes, people have takebacks and people have house rules on like how many takebacks you can get. Some people, like the rules lawyers of the world, will accept no takebacks and like, oh,
no
you played it.
You missed your trigger.
So yeah. So, just something to be aware of. Some people don't love rules lawyers, and sometimes you need them. So it's another complicated
that foil
thing.
is slightly curled, like all foils are, and your deck is now illegal. Let's move on to distractions.
Yeah, you want to take this one, Mitch?
This one's pretty simple. Turn off your phone, or turn on silent.
Yes.
That's basically it. It's really, be respectful for the people that you're playing with. Everyone's kind of taking time out of their day to kind of get together and play a game of Commander. Be respectful of them and be present.
Yep. Like we said before, a few times now, Commander can take a long time. It takes even longer if you have to get up to speed every time it's your turn because you were, browsing on your phone. So
Yep,
just
absolutely.
Pay attention.
Okay, so in closing, Eddie, wrap this whole thing up in a nice bow and let everyone know, basically, if they just skipped ahead to this part, what we were talking about.
Yeah. So Taboos of Commander, don't do them.
Good. That's perfect. Done. We're out of here.
There's a couple things that I've written down in actuality. One, mostly this comes down to interpersonal relationships. It's, Commander games are an extension of real life, even if it is a game. Same concepts apply. Like, just have a little empathy. If you are building a deck that you don't think you'd enjoy playing against, maybe, give it a second thought. Like, do you really want to build this mass land destruction deck?
Yeah, or God of Salt Turgrid.
Oh, Turgrid. I actually have someone that I know that's building a Turgrid deck.
Of course. I know who that is.
Probably. And so anyway, there is one quote from the rules committee that on their website addresses a lot of what we've talked about in a little bit more, summarical way. And they have a quote here that I'll quickly read. It says, strategies like draw go, which is basically, control decks, or mass land destruction, which aim to restrict opponents' ability to act at all, aren't forbidden in Commander. But they aren't very popular. Most people don't find them fun to play against, and one of the tenets of Commander is the shared play experience. If your deck isn't fun to play against, people won't want to play against it. And you can't force someone to play Commander with you. As a result, these strategies are fairly unpopular. That said, there's some places where any strategy is acceptable. Some games are played at a high power level, no holds barred. If your potential opponents like that kind of game, great. Just recognize that Commander players aren't looking for that and may choose not to play against it. So it's a good idea to let people know what you're planning before the game starts. Ask if they're okay with it, and be prepared to play something else if they're not.
Yeah, that sums it up, I think, pretty perfectly.
Yeah. And if you find any of these taboos a little salt-inducing, or if any of the play styles we mentioned might raise your hackles a bit, we have a solution for you. About half a year ago, we came out with a podcast called How to Be Salt-Free in Commander. Yep. And if these are getting under your skin, I would recommend giving that episode a nut. We share some tips and tricks on how to kind of smooth out the play experience and have a good time pretty much no matter what.
How to perfectly play Commander without any salt whatsoever.
Exactly.
100% guaranteed.
Yep.
Just kidding.
Or your money
Not
back.
at all guaranteed.
All right. Well, thanks for having me on the show, Mitch.
Thanks for breaking into my house and forcing yourself onto the show.
I'm mostly here for the dog pets. Bentley is a great
he
hound.
He is the bestest boy of all time. In the comments below, let me know how good of a boy Bentley is.
And also, what are the most taboo things in your experience?
But
and how
mostly about my dog.
Yes. Okay. I think we need to close with a picture of Bentley across the screen. And cut.